science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and a science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. Put on your lab coat, put on your safety glasses, and hold on to your tail. This is the Science Pawdcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Science Pawdcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. Our family had an amazing time at Comic-Con. If you listened to last week's episode, I said we were heading to the Calgary Expo, and it was so much fun. We went for 2 days, 2 whole days of super nerdy fun. We had hundreds, maybe even in the thousands of pictures taken by super happy fans of our cosplay. On Friday, we went as a Loki team, so each of us was a different Loki. Duncan, Adam, Chris, and I were a different Loki. And I had a little crocodile or alligator Loki. It's an alligator, but people call him Croaky. And at the Comic-Con, there was an actual alligator that I got to hold, which was really cool. And our Mandalorian team, the second day was pretty popular, but definitely Adam stole the show with the IG-11 battle droid that I built. He definitely was the most popular person, I think, just about anywhere on Saturday. And it was a very uncomfortable costume to wear, and he did great. The dogs stayed at the spa, and that's the awesome boarding facility that we have. Shout out to Foxy and Lacey. And Ginger stayed home, and my father-in-law, Gord, had a deal with Adam to take care of the cat, and everybody was so happy to see us. Well, Ginger, I don't know, it's hard to read a cat. The dogs were pretty happy to see us when we returned. All right, well, that's what happened with the family. We'll have more stories in the family section. Let's move on to the podcast proper. In science news, we're going to take a look at some evidence about Goldilocks planets. Not all good news, which is too bad. In pet science, we're going to talk about chocolate and dogs. I don't know if we've ever talked about the science of chocolate and dogs, but we're going to talk about it today. Our expert guest this week is a different type of expert we haven't had yet. It's a software engineer. We welcome Janique-ka John to the stage. Hey dogs, what do you call a software engineer doing squats? A back-end developer. That's a good one. All right, on with the show, because there's no time like science time. Okay, this week in science news, we're going to talk about Goldilocks stars. So stars that potentially are the best source for life to live around. Now, for a comparison, we need to chat about our own star, the sun. Well, what is our sun? Our sun is a yellow star, yellow dwarf star, actually. And the exact classification of it is a GV star. I don't know what that is. I'm sure the astronomers will be upset that I don't know, but I don't know what a GV star is. A GV star, good very star, I don't know. And they all have these classification stars, all have a relatively the same amount of temperature on the surface, and they last for about 10 billion years. Let's just say there's a lot more billion years left. It's not something in the immediate future we have to worry about how long our star's going to last. And our sun is right in the middle of the main sequence. So stars go through a young period where they're chaotic, a middle sequence where they're kind of chill, and a growth phase. At least the yellow stars grow, and then their outer shell falls off. It'll probably turn into a red giant and collapse down into something called a white dwarf. All right, so that's our star. This article, the science story, doesn't talk about yellow stars. It talks about orange stars. And orange stars aren't quite as bright as our yellow star, but they last a lot longer. So they don't burn out as quickly. Big stars take way less time to die. They die very quickly. They burn bright and burn out and blow up or turn into a black hole or some other funkiness. Not great for life to live around because life takes a long time to come about and evolve, comparing it to life on Earth, obviously. So the idea is that if you can live around a star that has a really, really long lifespan, the chances of life developing is a lot higher. So the idea was early on, until maybe now with more evidence, is that these orange stars are a greater category or greater candidate for life on the planets that orbit them than even our yellow star. red dwarfs, tiny, tiny stars, last the longest, but the planets that would have to be around them would be really close and susceptible to flaring and dangerous radiation from those red stars, even the little ones, even though they last a long time. So data came from the Hubble Space Telescope, and it's not good. Astronomer Tyler Ricciowel and her colleagues looked at this data, and the data also was a pretty good sample. It was 39 orange dwarf stars. They're all moving together. Well, with yellow stars, when you look at them as they age and their young, kind of flamboyant stage, a lot of UV radiation and other dangerous rays come out of them, and they spin quickly. And as they age, they spin slower, and the dangerous waves slow as well. But with an orange star, it's different. The data seem to show that the youngest orange stars and the older orange stars emit the same amount of dangerous UV radiation. The spin that a yellow star goes through that slowly slows, it seems to slow for a second, not a second, slow for a time in these orange stars, and then kind of stalls out, sort of like if you've ever been on a merry-go-round, you go really, really fast and then you slow the revolutions. This would be like slowing down and then the rate of slowing stalls and it just continues spinning at that same speed. So therein lies the problem. High levels of UV radiation and solar wind would be coming off these orange stars. Not so good for life. If there was a lot of high-intensity UV, so we're talking like the upper limit of UV, that's not great for organic molecules. It would kind of like break them apart. Unlike low-level UV, there's different levels of UV, was good because that helps us with vitamin D. But high energy would charge the particles on Earth. It would kind of rip them apart and turn them into ions. And then the wind from the star, the pushing out of its own particles, might strip away over millions of years any air or atmosphere that formed on the planet. It's thought that that's probably what happened to Mars. Mars had its atmosphere stripped away. And why? One of the main reasons isn't necessarily what the star is made of. It's the planet that orbits it. So while it's not great for life to evolve potentially around these orange stars if they are bombarded constantly with UV, there's a couple ways out of it. Number one is the analog for life is us, and life evolved on Earth dealing with the radiation from our star. Life on other planets may find a way around or a way to protect themselves against the light from planets with lots and lots of UV radiation. I'll mention this because I just love using the science of this video game, Mass Effect. In Mass Effect, there's a species of alien called Turian. Yes, we're going to get a little nerdy for a second. And their planet, called Palaven, is close to this an orange star. And the orange star emits a ton of UV radiation. Everything on Palaven, including the Turians, have a really hard carapace. They're all protected with, their skin is more armored, I guess. It's protected. So the Turians have plates to protect them. Genius way to explain the biology that would evolve around these other stars. Secondly, planets themselves, if they have a magnetic field, could protect the inhabitants of the planet. Earth has a magnetic field. Venus doesn't, or maybe that's why the atmosphere on Venus isn't what it is on Earth. Mars had a magnetic field that it lost, and there went its atmosphere. So a magnetic field could protect these planets. So it's not all bad news. It's just the news isn't as good as it was, that around these orange stars, because they are so long-lived, it's a better candidate for life than a yellow star, which isn't as long-lived. We won't really know until our telescopes get a little bit better, or we get data from James Webb, which is so exciting. That's science news for this week. This week in Pet Science, I think we should talk about chocolate. Now, Easter's over. I guess this probably, timely. It could have come out before Easter. But as things go, I'm always a couple weeks late on everything. And there are some questions on social media about dogs and chocolate. And I don't think I've broken down why chocolate, any type of chocolate, is really bad for dogs. So while this isn't a timely science story, It's just about chocolate and dogs. So the long and short of it is that chocolate contains a couple chemicals that dogs can't break down. They can't metabolize it as quickly as humans. And because they can't metabolize it, it accumulates in their body. It can cause a whole bunch of terrible side effects. The two chemicals, one is surprising, is caffeine. One is caffeine, and the other is theobromine. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into determining how bad chocolate is for dogs, because I'm sure you have heard stories of a dog eating chocolate and being totally fine. Our family dog, Gwyn, back when I lived with my parents, my dad bought a giant flat of Costco chocolate chip muffins, and somehow Gwyn got them off of the counter, and he ate a dozen. These are jumbo muffins, jumbo chocolate chip muffins. He ate 12 of them, and he had terrible poops for a couple of days, but we thought he was going to die. And we took him to the vet, and the vet's like, no, all of his life functions, like his heart rate and everything is fine. He's totally good. And we were shocked because he ate so many muffins, but maybe it's just because the amount of chocolate that was in them was so small. But bringing this back to science, this is what affects the dog. It's the levels of theobromine and caffeine in the chocolate product, how big your dog is, right? The bigger the dog, the more they can probably eat. There's sensitivity within every dog, right? Some animals are more sensitive to chemicals than another, and how much of it they ate. So all of that goes together with explaining why some dogs get really, really sick or die from chocolate. The chocolate that's most toxic to dogs is dark chocolate. And that's just because it contains the most chemicals of theobromine and caffeine. Compared to milk chocolate, like Cadbury chocolate, I know there's probably some chocolatiers out there that are going to correct me. They're like, milk chocolate isn't real chocolate. Dark chocolate is the right chocolate. I don't know. But anyways, in dark chocolate, there's 130 to roughly 450 milligrams per ounce of theobromine compared to milk chocolate, which has about 50. So you're looking at minimum double, sometimes maybe 9 times as much of the dangerous chemical in dark chocolate. White chocolate, which I don't mind, but Chris hates. Chris, when she got white chocolate as a kid, she would just use it as chalk on the sidewalk. White chocolate has almost no theobromine in it. Thus, it's not even a threat to dogs. Stuff in it like white chocolate almond bark, the almonds in it are more toxic for dogs than the white chocolate itself. What happens if your dog gets into chocolate? What happens if they eat, a chocolate bar? They have a sweet tooth, right? Dogs have a sweet tooth, so they're going to go after stuff that's sweet, and chocolate's sweet for sure. You're going to see them within about 6 to 12 hours. If there's bad symptoms, they're going to have excessive panting. They're going to look sick. They're going to be super thirsty. They're going to throw up and have terrible diarrhea. So like they're just going to start to get really sick. And for Gwyn, he exhibited no signs of that except giant poops the next day. He pooped out 12 jumbo Costco muffins. And like if it gets really bad, that's where the dangerous stuff comes. Like, 12 hours later, you'll have a dog that has like a racing heart and then an irregular heartbeat. And you could even have seizures and then coma and death. So in the upper levels, the dog gets sick, it keeps getting sicker, and then, could potentially die. And that's tragic. One thing that's kind of interesting is that in dogs, that theobromine, the thing that they can't metabolize at all or very, very slowly, because they can't metabolize it quickly, chocolate poisoning can last for days, long periods of time while their body breaks it down. How do you treat chocolate poisoning? If you suspect that your dog has eaten a bunch of chocolate, you need to take them to the vet. Like, don't mess about with this. Like, if you had a chocolate bar and you come back and there's no chocolate bar, I would get them to a vet, because the vet can induce vomiting and give them stuff like charcoal, which purges toxins from their digestive system and kind of like binds to it, and they poop it out or they puke it up. You just don't want theobromine and caffeine getting into their blood through metabolism. One thing that Gwyn probably had going for him was the chocolate chips were probably milk chocolate in the bread and the muffins. And because they were tiny, he probably just didn't ingest enough to get him sick. Baking chocolate or dark chocolate, if it was dark chocolate chips, he probably would have got sick. So just remember, obviously every dog is different. Obviously there's different sizes of dogs. A Bunsen sized dog compared to a Chihuahua is going to be vastly affected differently by eating a whole chocolate bar. I don't even know if a Chihuahua can eat a whole chocolate bar. Anyways, and there will be signs and symptoms of your dog getting sick: panting, drooling, thirst, vomiting, diarrhea. I think if you're a pet owner, if you're a dog owner, your dog has probably gotten sick like that before. It's kind of scary. And if you think they've eaten chocolate, really don't mess about. Take them to the vet. So that's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, before we get to the interview section, I thought I would just give you some ideas about how you could support the Science Pawdcast. Number one, you could support us on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/BunsonBurner. There's multiple tiers of support, and the lowest tier of support is not much more than a cup of coffee a month. The second way is you could check out our merch shop. We've worked really hard to partner with clothing companies that do a great job of providing vibrant colors and soft feels. We also have the Beaker stuffy for sale. It's so cute. The third way you could support us is giving us great reviews on our podcast playing apps. Any kind of review helps. And if you can't find a review, share our podcast with people. Thanks, everybody. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Podcast, and we have a really different type of expert this week. Janique-ka John, who's a software engineer. How are you doing today, Janique-ka?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk to you. We haven't really delved into computer software, computer design, computer engineering yet on the podcast. So first off, thank you for agreeing to talk to us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to dive in.
Okay, great. Where are you in the world? Where are you calling into the podcast from?
So I'm currently located in Brussels, but because of the pandemic, I work around Europe. But I'm from St. Vincent the Grenadines, hence the accent.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and we'll maybe touch on that at the end of the podcast. Now I mentioned you're a software engineer. What does it take to become a software engineer? What's the training for that?
Right. Well, this field is kind of particular in that you don't necessarily have to follow the path that I followed. But in my particular case, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, and also a master's degree in applied computer science. But I want to stress, for software engineering, you don't necessarily have to have a formal training to become a software engineer.
You can kind of learn it as you go and then be a software engineer. Is that kind of the idea, what you're getting at?
Yeah, definitely. Like there's so many free resources available online, and you could kind of, dive into things yourself, do your own practice, and get your hands dirty and build websites, for example, and deploy them without formal training. So that's quite cool.
Well, I did build a website for our Bunsen and Beaker merch store, but I am not a software engineer. I'm definitely like a low tier, barely functional engineer with software. So you took a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in computing. What got you into computers? Like, what was the bug to get you on this path, Janique-ka?
Yeah, so I didn't really have a straight path. And I noticed that this is a case for like a lot of women who got into software engineering. But for me, for example, I was actually studying pure sciences, so biology, chemistry, and so forth, which I still love those sciences. And I had actually applied to do a bachelor's degree in biology, and I got my acceptance letter. And I looked at my acceptance letter and I decided, you know what, I'm going to try out computer science. And I wrote to the dean and say, hey, I'm interested in doing computer science instead. Can we change my major? And, the rest is kind of history. And to this day, I don't know exactly what made me decide to make that change, but I don't regret it. But outside of that, like I had always been exposed to computers. For example, my dad is also like let's say like a computer engineer. And so I had been exposed to it for a very long time and from a very young age. And people always saw me as kind of like the computer person, but
Mm.
still I never saw myself like formally studying it, you know?
Oh, so like when you were young, you were the go-to person of the group to do the computer tech stuff.
Definitely. Definitely. People would come to me to ask questions. Even in class, like because we had to do mandatory IT classes, people would
Mm.
always come to me. I would always be tinkering, trying out things. But I still, even with this experience, I never thought to do it formally until that moment.
Wow. Did you, when you were young, did you do any kind of like simple computer programming, or did it just start once you made that kind of crucial decision?
No, I was actually so when I was in secondary school, for instance, which is what we call it in St. Vincent, which is like high school, I guess, in the US. I did a website. First, I used one of those click and go websites. So, like, what you see, what you get, you move around things.
Yeah, that's how I
And
do things.
I distinctly remember like going to my dad and say, "Hey, I made this website." And he said, "That's good, but there's code behind this website. Why don't you try that?" And I actually went and tried HTML and so forth and kind of played around and got to understanding like how to build a very basic website. So even back then, even before the formal training, I was always playing around with coding and website building.
Cool, cool. So now you are a software engineer and you've been through all that training. You got your master's degree. Very cool, by the way. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
That's a big deal getting a master's. Now that you're a full-fledged software engineer, is there some projects you're working on, or maybe a project in the past that you've worked on that you could talk to us about? It would maybe give our audience an idea like what you do with your
Yeah,
background.
sure. So now I'm a software engineer at work. So my day job is a software engineer, but also in my free time I like to build stuff just for fun. Just to see,
Oh,
what I can make and also to solve problems. And one of or I guess two of the programs that I would mention that are running right now that could be interesting is one is my SVG news bot, which is a bot that runs on Twitter and basically scrapes news websites from my home country and tweets out the latest news articles to the Twitter timeline from this bot. So that one was quite fun. And then during the pandemic, a journalist reached out to me and told me that he would go to Johns Hopkins website and go to every Caribbean country and manually count every day or add up every day all the different cases just to get like an overview in the Caribbean. And mentioned that there was kind of a lack of a focus on the Caribbean with COVID reporting. And so I worked on Carry COVID Map, it's called, where I basically just aggregate COVID statistics, vaccines, case rates, deaths as well, but with a Caribbean perspective. So you could easily go on and see what the situation is in the Caribbean with COVID.
so you did this in your spare time? Like this is not your day job. You're just like, hey,
No,
let's do this.
exactly. This is
Oh,
in my spare time.
I can't even
Yeah.
imagine how you would begin to do that. Like your program's got to like somehow look at the data on the page. Obviously in the code there's numbers, and pick those numbers out and spit it into something that's manageable. I can't even wrap my head around that. It's magic to me.
So, well, for the carry COVID map, for example, API is the magic key there, which essentially provide data which I could ingest as a program and kind of present it in a way that's useful to me. So in my case, I used an API which had all the COVID data in the world, and I filtered out the Caribbean cases and kind of manipulated the data in a way, for example, to plot graphs or to show dots over particular Caribbean countries
Hmm.
with those data. So API is the magic there.
Well, I think you're a bit of a wizard to use it. That's what you did that's what you've done in your spare time. can we talk about what you do as a day job? Because it's pretty interesting for us. You're a Twitter developer. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so well, my day job is as a software engineer at a Belgian company, which is why I'm based in Brussels. But
Oh, okay.
aside from that, I'm also a Twitter developer insider, which is quite cool, and it kind of shows you the power of software engineering. So another one of these projects that I did for fun used the Twitter API. And Twitter noticed what I was doing, and they actually reached out to me and offered me this role as a Twitter developer insider. And it has been an amazing journey so far. I was part of the first cohort. And for example, we have meetings with project engineers, project managers at Twitter, and we get kind of insights into the roadmap. They let us know ahead of time when something is being released, so we could kind of give feedback. And these are all technical releases, so again related to the Twitter API. And we have a direct line to Twitter as well, as Twitter developer insiders, which is amazing.
Hmm.
So even as I develop out, for example, Spaces Search, which is another one of my projects which I mentioned, if I notice, things, bugs with the Twitter API, I have somebody I could directly speak to at Twitter and say, "Hey, I noticed this problem," and they give me direct feedback, which is really cool.
I might have missed it. What are some of the things that you helped develop for Twitter? What do you do as an insider?
Yeah, sure. So I did the Spaces Search, which was one of the ones
Oh,
that I
wow.
mentioned,
Oh yeah,
and
sorry. I missed that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got it now.
no,
Yep.
no problem. So maybe I should like give a little bit of background about Spaces
Sure.
first, so people
Yeah,
can
that'd be great.
understand.
We love Spaces, by the way. Like if you're part of that, good job. It's amazing.
Well, so for those who don't know, Spaces is essentially social audio on Twitter, which is such a great fit for Twitter because if you think about
Mhm.
public conversation, you already think about Twitter. But it was all text based up until a couple of months ago. And I had joined the beta because I was so excited about the project. So I was one of the first testers. But also being a software engineer, once Twitter started building the Spaces API in public. So again, I mentioned APIs, which I say is like the magic thing on the internet. I love APIs so much. Yeah, Twitter, the cool thing about Twitter is that they decided to build it in public. So one of the things that I would have done is given feedback to one of the developer relations persons at Twitter about the direction that they were going, and give hints, for example, of things that we would need, especially from a Caribbean perspective. And I had also suggested them to make a public we call it swagger file in computer science. It's essentially a public map, let's say, of all the endpoints that would be available for the API. And with that suggestion, they actually took it up, which is the cool thing about Twitter. They listen to what you have to say and they actually act on it.
Hmm.
They actually took it up, and with that, a lot of developers were able to develop a Spaces product or a Spaces related product really soon after the API was launched.
Oh.
So,
So
yeah.
it's like a cascade effect, is what you're saying. What you did has helped others do their own thing.
Yes, exactly, 100%.
Wow.
And it also helped me, get closer to Twitter and then eventually get this role as a Twitter developer insider.
Cool. Because there's one guy we know on Twitter that has the Spaces dashboard. Andrew, his name is.
Yes.
And I wonder if how they developed that also was from your reason, like what you figured out and helped Twitter with. That that's so interesting.
So I know Andrew as well, and I actually also tested his Spaces dashboard product.
Oh.
And he's also using the Spaces API, the public Spaces API that's available from Twitter. And
Mhm.
I should ask him, but I would be surprised if it didn't help to have the endpoints available ahead of time because he also launched his product quite soon after it became available. Because I guess for a bit of clarity, so the APIs, as I said, so it stands for Application Programming Interface.
Hmm.
And it's the way that a lot of developers interact with, let's say, other bodies of code that live, for example, on the internet, or in this case, on Twitter servers. So they have, let's say, a kind of portal, and you just attach your host to that portal, and you get information that kind of spits out of that host, if you could think of it that way.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know what hoses you need to attach ahead of time, what tends to happen is that a company publicly launches their API. You spend time researching, understanding what hoses you need to attach, and then you build the hoses and attach them, and that can take time. So that's why I had suggested that since they were already working on their API endpoints, if they could give us a kind of glimpse into it ahead of time, so we could already build our hoses and just attach them when they become available, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I'm sure if you started to talk code, it wouldn't make sense, but that's a great analogy. Very cool. Well, that's exciting. I mean, as our account uses Spaces twice a week, and it's been amazing from science communication, like just the product or the thing, Spaces it's very,
I
very
love
cool.
it.
It's very, very cool. It's given all of these different places around the world voices too. Like,
100%.
yeah, like I went into this huge, I forget the gentleman's name that runs these these rooms about Africa. And I just sat
Mhm.
in one and listened to these people who were speaking English talk about Africa. And it's like issues and things you never would think of living where you are in the world. And I think that's really important. There's something about,
100%.
yeah, there's something about the voice, right? Somebody's voice, right? Like you and me having this conversation that makes it's it's different than text. I don't know if that
A
makes any
hundred
sense.
percent.
Hmm.
No, it's true. I mean, there's even people on my timeline that I had seen on my timeline for years, because I have been using Twitter for like maybe 10 years by now. That I never really interacted with in the same way that I did once I had Spaces. And so that's why I was so excited about the product as well, because I
Hmm.
realized, this is a potential for us. I always think about the context of the Caribbean, for us to kind of have a chance to step up on the world stage in a way that hasn't been, possible, let's say,
Hmm.
on Twitter, save for just text. So
Hmm.
that's exactly why I was so excited about this product.
Hmm. Very cool. Janique-ka, can I ask you a question about your job in Brussels? Or
Sure.
is that okay? Because we haven't touched on that, I believe, yet, right?
Right.
Okay. Janique-ka, could you talk to us about what you do with your main job, like not your Twitter insider job, but your other job?
Yeah, so as a software engineer at my company, Mediagenics, I am a front end developer. So when you think about front end, think about mainly the part of the software that you see. So for example, if you go to Twitter on the web, the part that you see the graphics and so forth, but also some of the logic, that's the front end. And so I occupy myself mainly with that. I use a programming language called JavaScript and a very popular library called React to get my day to day job done. And a common vein here with software engineering is problem solving. There are different problems, in this case, client related. And we, on a daily basis, try to squash bugs, for example, but also develop features that could really make a difference in the client's workflow. So that's what I do on a daily basis. And it's all broadcasting related. It's a broadcast management tool, actually. So a lot of, let's say, transmissions, contents, and so forth is the type of features that I tend to build around. But I love it. It's super fun. I love software engineering in general. So if you haven't guessed it yet.
I love it. I love it. So that doesn't get frustrating to you, like helping, like fixing bugs. That's your jam. You like that kind of stuff.
Oh, it's always frustrating, but there's a cycle. So there's a cycle of annoyance when you can't figure out, why is this bug here? What's happening? But then, after you finally squash the bug, because you always do once you have some patience, there's a reward. There's that rewarding feeling of, hey, there was this problem. I solved it. Give me the next problem. It's like that every day.
Oh, cool. I'm so glad there's people like you out there doing that kind of work, because I think with me, that would not be my jam. I'd be like, oh, there's this bug. Good luck, deal with it. So good on you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think this is why I always like try to tell people, try programming, try it out, see if you like it. Because it might be some people's cup of tea, it might not. Some people really enjoy this. Like for me, it gives me a rush to kind of have problems and then solve them. But for some people, of course, it can be quite frustrating. But you never know until you try. So
That's right. You never know. You didn't know until you made that last second decision. So there you go.
exactly. There you go.
I love it. So this is kind of a big question for you, Janique-ka. We've never had somebody with your skill set on the podcast before. And sometimes we ask these big think questions. And it's what is something you'd like the average person to know about coding, about what programming? Like what's something that you would, if you were to tell somebody about coding or programming, what would you like them to know?
Yeah. So it's related to, actually closely related to what I was just talking about, or like a common theme that I have mentioned so far, which is that it's not as intimidating as you think. I think when a lot of people, or when the average person thinks about coding or software engineering, they think, oh, there's something really obscure and I could never do it. Or they think, oh, I have to do some kind of formal training. They really already put up a wall, let's say, to
Mm.
the concept of coding. But I want to say that it's not as intimidating as you think. And it comes down to, let's say, patterns of thinking, interest, and also just giving it a try. Like I said, there's so many resources available online for free, where you could get started at literally any age and just try it out and see if you like it. So this is what I want the average person to know. It's not as intimidating as you think. Give it a try.
There's probably some 7-year-old with a YouTube channel teaching HTML. I'd imagine on YouTube, right? I'm
I
sure there
mean,
is.
I'm totally sure that such a YouTube channel exists. Like I have no doubt.
Something, I don't know, right? Like I always tell that to people about pretty much anything. There's going to be some little kid on YouTube explaining it to you, and they have 17 followers, and you can go listen to them. So
100%. I mean, so much free content. And because there's so much free content as well, if you find a YouTube channel and you feel like, oh, this is not sticking for me, you could try somebody else. There might be somebody else teaching JavaScript or React or Redux, and they explain it just in the way that you get it. So, really, if you stick to it and you're really curious about coding, just go ahead, type on YouTube, and give it a shot.
cool. What a great message. Thanks, Janique-ka. Maybe I should give it another shot too. That's another theme I'm hearing here too.
Yes.
We have a couple standard questions that we ask our guests about on the podcast. And the first one is for a pet story. We asked our guests to share a pet story from their life because we mix science and expertise with animals. Do you have a pet story you could share with us?
One pet story I will share is that I am a huge dog lover, really huge. I grew up in the Caribbean, as I said, and we had at least 5 or 6 dogs at one
What?
time.
What?
This is how I grew up, so I don't know any other lifestyle really. Um, I really love dogs. But my pet story is that now I live in a big city in a small apartment, so I cannot have a dog, but I do have a digital dog. In the metaverse, no, in Sims, called Tamarind. Um, But yeah, that's my pet story. For now, I don't have a dog, but I'm really looking forward to the time when I could go back to having 5 or 6 dogs at once.
Aw. Did you say you have a digital dog? Was that a joke and I missed it, or you actually have
Mm,
a digital dog?
I I really do have a digital dog. In I play The Sims in my
Oh, and
downtime.
Sims. There we go. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I missed it. I
And
missed
so
that you said that. Yeah,
so I have dogs there. My most recent dog is called Tamron.
Tamron. I love The Sims. I used to play that with my wife back in the day all the time.
It's
And
such
we
a
some
great game.
yeah. Do you like their language, like their nonsensical language that they talk?
Oh yes, and there's actually videos where they go through like the logic of how they came up with the language because there's actually
Really?
rhyme and reason to what they say. Yes.
My wife and I sometimes talk Sims language to each other. Like I'll go, "Hey, blabagia," and then she'll go, "Grashna, Grashna." Like it's like they're weird. Like it's from. I think it was we played it on the GameCube. Like it wasn't on computer. It was on GameCube. That's so funny
Yeah.
that um. And do you try to have the best life for your Sims, or do you torture them like some people do?
I really stick to very straightforward gameplay. Actually, my sim looks like me, and I get a dog instead of a cat, for example. Uh, since I'm not a cat person, like I don't try to do anything very, let's say, crazy.
Okay. I didn't mean to derail our conversation, but I have a lot of fond memories of playing The Sims. I think my one sim accidentally somehow became like involved with a band, and I didn't know
Wow.
how that happened. Like I think like something happened, and they came home with a guitar, and I'm like, wait a second, how did this happen? I was trying to make him become a scientist.
Wow. I mean, we remember these virtual worlds, and it's kind of funny that now there's so much conversation and hype around the metaverse.
Mm,
Like for example, Facebook just changed their name to Meta.
yeah,
But in some senses, this type of digital online life or life that's only in the computer has existed for quite some time.
right. Are you a fan of The Office, the American version, The Office? Have
I've seen a few
you've seen it?
clips, but
Okay.
I haven't watched like the whole thing.
Gotcha. There's one episode where one of the main characters, Dwight, he's a bit depressed, and he creates a character of himself, Dwight, in Second Life. He's playing this game called Second Life. So it's just more of the same metaverse type stuff.
Exactly. I mean, it repeats itself, right? We just get different words for it. And it's the same in the software engineering world. The underlying problems that we pay attention to, they become more complex and they scale more. But like the fundamentals, let's say, of computer science, they always remain the same.
I love it. Cyclical. The other main question we ask on the podcast is for our guests to share the super fact. And the super fact is something that you know that when you tell people kind of blows their mind a bit. Do you have a super fact for us?
Yes, I have a super fact, and it's in the season if you celebrate Christmas, and it's also tied to my home country. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, I'm from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And my country is the only country in the world that celebrates a festival that started today, actually, that's called Nine Mornings.
Nine
And
mornings.
yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
And what that is that we get up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, even on
What?
work days,
Uh,
9 mornings before Christmas, and we head to a city. So the closest city to you or the main city. So I used to go to the main city, which is Kingston, and we play games. There's usually people selling fruits, oranges, for example. And there's a stage and people sing carols, and it's all like one big community. And it's historical. It has been going on for years and years and years. And we're the only
Holy.
country in the world that celebrates it 9 mornings before Christmas.
How do people stay awake? That's so early.
That's the funny thing. It's such a big part of our culture that you make jokes. I remember once I started working, we would make jokes about people feeling sleepy at work because they were up 9 mornings earlier that day.
Oh
Yep.
my goodness. But that's exciting, right? Like you get up and everybody's doing it and there's fun activities and things to get.
I love
Um,
it. And the
that's so cool.
atmosphere is also so together. Like everybody's like one big family, you know? You don't feel like strangers. You feel like everybody's
Aw.
going into a huge living room to watch their friends sing Christmas carols. It's
Aw.
awesome.
Well, the only problem if you were to do that in Canada, where I live, is that if you got up at 3 o'clock in the morning today, it would be about minus 30 degrees Celsius. So you would
Yeah,
die.
I can
And you wouldn't
imagine.
go outside. You would stay inside and you'd be like, why did I get up so early? It's death outside. And you would go back to sleep. So,
I can imagine. I can imagine. But it's quite warm there at this time of
right,
year.
right.
So
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, that is a super fact. I'm the more I talk to guests, and especially like on Spaces, as we were mentioning, I love learning these little tidbits about other people's cultures. Because unless you meet somebody from another culture, you just don't know. You don't know. You have no idea what's going on in other parts of the world. So I so appreciate your
exactly.
super fact. Thank you. We're kind of at the end of the podcast, and the last section is it's a fun one, and our guests get to talk about something that's important to them. It can be something that they're passionate about, like a hobby or a sport, or a cause. And Janique-ka, you wanted to talk about your passion to help the Caribbean, and I'll let you take it away. I'll let you explain why you're so passionate about that.
Yeah, so I kind of discovered, as I mentioned, by accident that I love software engineering, that I love coding, and that I love problem solving. And in the past couple of years, let's say, I've been able to use code to solve small problems, in my opinion. And I would really, really love for one to create more things like this, to create more things that I feel helps like the Caribbean, but also to empower others, young people, young girls especially, to experiment with coding. Because let's say maybe if I had never accidentally, come across coding, I might have never become a software engineer. I might not be where I am today. And so I'm really passionate about one, using code to solve problems, but also educating others. And I love using Twitter as well for this, because I feel like Twitter, as I said, is a really good way to stay locked into the public conversation and also to connect with us as a Caribbean region. Because the unique thing about the Caribbean is that we are all groups of separate islands, but we're all quite tapped into what each island is experiencing, because we're all kind of connected. We're all one. We share the same history, more or less. And so yeah, I like I said, I love using Twitter, for example, to kind of keep connected to the problems going on there and coming up with software. For example, Carry COVID Map was born out of a conversation with a journalist via DM on Twitter. And then researchers ended up using it, for example, to keep track of the COVID situation in the Caribbean. So this is something I hope to eventually move back home as well,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of spread the expertise that I have gained so far, and maybe even open a school and teach people how to code.
Well, that's very inspiring. Janique-ka, can I ask you a couple follow-up questions
Sure.
about the Caribbean? For our guests who are geographically challenged, like me, the Caribbean, the Caribbean, what would include the Caribbean? Just, I don't want to like paraphrase it and get it wrong. And what includes the Caribbean? There's a whole bunch of islands, right? Like you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So there's different definitions. Let's say it's,
Mm-hmm.
geopolitics. There's of course like the geographic Caribbean. So for example, Cuba right down to Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
But the Caribbean also tends to include countries like Guyana, which is actually in South America, and Belize, which is actually in Central America. So if you visit my
Really?
Carry COVID map, for example, exactly, you would see
Okay.
those actually included in the count, whereas somebody from the outside trying to solve the same problem might not be aware of it, which is why, again, kind of segueing back to software engineering, is so important to have for more people or a lot of people to have access to
Mm-hmm.
coding so that they could solve their own unique problems in their ways. So yeah, Belize, for example, is included because we share the same history. So that whole
Oh,
area, that region there is the Caribbean. Yep.
right. And one more time, which island are you from?
So I'm from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is
Okay, there it is. I
actually
see
a
it.
group of islands. Yeah.
I've got a map. Okay, I've got a map. Like I know Canada and I know Europe, but I don't know this area of the world. So I've got a map up. I see where you're from.
Yes.
Saint Vincent and Grenadine. They're different islands,
So
right?
it's one country, but it's
Okay.
32 islands and keys. And I was born and grew up on St. Vincent, which is the main island.
Oh wow, it's so tiny. Like how long does it
Yes.
take you to get across? Janika, how long does it take
uh
you to get across the island?
Maybe like to go from one, because we always go around the perimeter of the island, so that could take you like 1 hour.
Wow. I live in Alberta, Canada. Like I don't know if you have a map to see how big the provinces of Canada are.
Oh
Like
yes.
they're just
Oh
huge.
yes. I mean,
Can I ask you? Like
mhm.
I just have so many questions, and this is. Can I ask a couple more? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
sure. Feel free. Yeah, feel free.
Okay. So growing up on this little island, like were you constantly having to hop on boats to go around? Like if you wanted, like you must have, like otherwise you were on this little island and that was you were kind of stuck there. I'd imagine.
Funny enough, I love that you asked this question, because this is another kind of like passion point of mine. Yeah, this is another passion point of mine. The fact that it's so expensive to get around the Caribbean. So you would
Oh,
imagine that we go by boat from one country to the other. We actually fly. So, for example, to
really?
get from St. Vincent to Barbados, we fly and it costs a lot. It's like a 35-minute plane ride, and it could
Yeah,
cost
I see that. Yeah.
$300 and up
Wow.
just to pop over. Exactly.
Right.
And this is something, like I said, is a passion point of mine. And a friend of mine actually rallied a petition and got thousands of signatures from people across the region to kind of petition the countries to lower the airplane taxes, because, like I said, we're so many small islands. We're separated by water,
Hmm.
but we all share the same history. And the kind of momentum that we could get if we connect as a region and really move as one is not the same, obviously, as if we were to really stick to our islands. Of,
Hmm.
for example, my island is 100,000 people. And so, yeah, this is something I would really love to see changed. More boats to connect more countries, more affordable way to travel. In my country, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there are boats that connect St. Vincent with the Grenadines.
Right.
But for
Okay.
example, to go from St. Vincent to St. Lucia, which is right above us,
I see that. Yeah.
there's no, let's say, regular line that's running. That's a boat. You have to
Wow.
fly,
That'd be so
which is insane.
frustrating. That'd be so
It's insane.
frustrating. Like Vancouver Island is this huge island on the western side of Canada that ferries go back and forth constantly, right, to connect the island to Maine, BC, British Columbia.
Hmm.
I can't imagine if there was nothing there, how frustrating that would be if you lived on the island or to the mainland trying to get back and forth. You would
And you
have to
had to
fly.
fly.
You'd have to fly. You'd have to fly. Like
It's
obviously,
crazy.
yeah. Obviously, a boat is way slower, but it's also way cheaper.
Exactly.
Huh.
100%. And when I studied, so I did my bachelor's degree in
Yeah.
Barbados.
In Barbados. Okay.
I would fly back and forth between St. Vincent and Barbados all the time.
Like to visit,
Uh,
to go back home, to go back to your
to go
house.
back home
Yeah.
on school breaks. Sometimes, if there was any emergency, I would fly back. Like, let's say a family member passed away, which had
Yeah.
happened while I
Hmm.
was studying. I would fly back. Different reasons to vote as well. I would fly back. And so, I just imagining how much money I spent is just
It's I can't
it's
imagine. Like
crazy.
I just get in my car and I drive. Like everything, I'm like Alberta is totally landlocked. Like where you are in Brussels, I mean everything's landlocked, right? Everything's you
Exactly.
drive, take the train, whatever. Like this is something. It's something people don't think about if they're not from a region like that.
A hundred
Wow,
percent.
wow. Is
Um,
there, Janika? Is there anything else that you'd like to let us know? Like what else is a struggle? of the region that you'd like to see change? I mean, since you're talking to us, and probably the majority of our listeners have no concept of the Caribbean, aside from like Johnny Depp as a pirate was around that area. So,
No, I mean, I'm thinking, and I guess like off the top of my head, what comes back is like my passion, like I said, which is connectivity amongst the Caribbean islands. So unification, which is something that we need to work on as a region within ourselves.
right.
But also that there's talent there. For example, there are software engineers there. There are people who, for example, study computer science and are great software engineers. And the pandemic has proven that people can work remotely, and a large number of the islands are English speaking, for example. And so there's a right market that's not being paid attention to right now for software engineers, for example.
I'm just so fascinated by what you do for a living and your story from the Caribbean. Can I ask just one more question before we wrap up?
Sure, feel free.
Okay, so for people not from the Caribbean, and maybe wanting to go there, like I'm going to think the vast majority of people who listen who are going to go there are going to be tourists. Like as somebody I've had on the show before from New York, I always ask like where would you point somebody as a tourist? Where do you think they should go? Like where should they go to experience that area of the world?
Well, I would be biased, of course, and I would say St. Vincent and the Grenadines
St.
is a
Vincent,
great
okay.
option.
Okay.
But honestly speaking, it is a great option just because it offers so much versatility. It's one country, but so many different islands.
Okay.
So, for example, the main island has black sand beaches. So if you never saw that before, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
But then the Grenadines have white sand beaches, and then every like island have their own small microcosm of culture and food. So you could kind of get this experience of visiting like so many different Caribbean islands without actually, you could island hop without leaving the country.
I bet you the food is amazing. I bet you the food is to die for.
Oh, love it. That's one of the things that I miss.
It's what you miss? Yeah. I imagine if I moved away from Canada, I'd miss weird stuff that we have, like ketchup chips and poutine and maple syrup. So I feel ya.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because you miss the things that you miss when you move away from home. Might not be the things that you expect to miss, or the most obvious things. Like,
yeah,
there are little things, which is something my eyes was open to only after I left home and left the region. There are little things that I take for granted as common. That's actually quite unique to where I'm from. And so I never noticed that I would miss it until I leave. That's
the truth of everything.
Yep.
Some Canadians don't miss the snow when they move away, but I think I would. I love the snow.
I love the winter. I don't. I'm not a fan of the winter, but I really love snow.
There you go. I've heard that from a lot of people who grew up in parts of the world where it does not snow. They're like, I like the idea of snow, but that's all I like is the idea of it. So
yeah, the winter itself is not that great.
Well, we're at the end of our chat. Janique-ka, thank you so much for giving us your time today to talk about computer software engineering. And just a really cool discussion about the Caribbean at the end. I mean, I wasn't expecting to learn so much about it. And thank you for talking about your passion for helping them. This has been an amazing chat.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me as well. Really grateful for this opportunity. And again, it just shows you how Twitter, for example, could connect people.
You're right, because we saw you on some random post about spaces. And I was like, wait, we got to track down this person. And we did. So this is great.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
The last question, real quick, Janique-ka, can people follow you on social media? Like, do you have is your account something that people could follow?
Oh, yes. So to follow me, it's at Janique-ka John. So my full name without the dash, because I have a dash between the Janique and the ka. On Instagram, on Twitter, everywhere at Janique-ka John.
At Janique-ka John. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, you take care of yourself. after all of this COVID stuff dies down, you've got my bug for maybe doing some travel south of Canada to certain islands down there. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, it's time for story time with me, Adam. But this story time is a very special story time. This story time is all about stories from Comic-Con. Yeah, if you don't know what story time is when we talk about stories that have happened within the past 1 or 2 weeks. But yeah, this time we're talking about stories that happened at Comic-Con. Mom, do you have a story?
I sure do. We went to Comic-Con. The end. No, just kidding. No, we went to Comic-Con and we got to spread joy to all of the patrons who went to Comic-Con. We saw some really great costumes and really great cosplay. But my favorite part is always going to the panels and listening to the celebrities. And we got to go to John Cleese, and he was amazing.
He's so
and
funny.
Super good. I really enjoyed that. But what else?
He did not want to sign autographs.
No, he was trying to delay going to sign autographs, and it was really quite funny. One of the weird parts was it was the unfortunate part that Jason only booked the hotel for the Airbnb for one night.
Okay, you're going to tell this story.
Yeah. So Jason said it's going to be great. We're going to be able to wake up and get ready and then, not be rushed. And I said, wow, that's awesome. Because usually it's a bit of a schmoz. And then what happened is Jason got the notification from the Airbnb guy saying, hey, just a reminder, checkout's at 11. And Jason said, what? And then he realized that he only booked the place for one night. And it was an amazing place. It was awesome.
It was good. Yeah, it was really good.
So that happened. So we just packed up and went to Comic-Con, and we went to a different Airbnb, which was just as nice. So it worked out.
It was lucky it worked out. It was a silly mistake I made on my part.
So that's my story. Bunsen is very much right here.
He's in the way.
He's like, in the way. Where is my chew? Because I need a chew like a soother to be quiet.
Okay, so I have a story from Comic-Con. So if you don't know, there's this like old meme with the Spider-Man pointing at each other. There's like a comic with like two Spider-Men pointing at each other. And yeah, so some of the Spider-Men who go to Comic-Con like doing that with each other, like pointing at each other for photos. But because we were the Lokis and because the Loki TV show came out not so long ago, there was a lot of Lokis. So every Loki that we met, we tried to get a photo doing the pointing thing, and we got like a couple photos with the other Lokis. So I think that was pretty fun. That was one of my favorite things at Comic-Con, was to see all of the other Lokis and do the pointy, funny thing with them.
Our Loki team was way more popular than I thought.
I knew it would be popular. I knew the Loki team would be the Loki variant team up would be popular. Jason, that was my idea, to go with Loki variants.
It was a good one. It was fun. It was the only tough thing to build was all of the helmets. And your sword too.
You put it on the 3D printer and set it and forget it.
Well, I know, but I had to like finish it and design all that, or finish it and paint it all to make it look screen accurate.
Yes, screen accurate is very important, and that's what you did, and it was good. And I was worried my costume wasn't going to come in time, but it came in lots of time.
Mm-hmm.
So that worked out really well.
Okay, Dad, do you have a story?
I'll say two stories. When we were walking around as the Loki variants, I went as classic Loki. So if you watch the Disney Plus show, there's a variant that is based upon the Loki from the comic books, and the costume's horrible. It is so bright yellow and spandexy.
It was amazing, because if I was looking for you, all I had to look for was Big Bird, because you were about as yellow as Big Bird.
I know. And to make it more funny, I got a little alligator and 3D printed the alligator Loki crown, because in the show, there's a variant of Loki that's an alligator. So people really like the touch of having the Loki alligator. Now, my story is almost surreal. We were walking around and people kept telling us, we need to go check out the real alligator. There's a real alligator. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. What are they talking about? But sure enough, there was a reptile booth that was raising money for reptile like surrendered reptiles and reptile rescue. And for a little bit of money, you could pose with the alligator. But when they saw us coming, they so wanted us to pose with the alligator because they had a little Loki crown for their real little alligator. So we got a picture with the alligator with the Loki crown, and everybody was losing their mind because we were the Loki variants with a real Loki variant crocodile or alligator.
Yeah,
really
it was super cool. Her name was Fiona.
Mm-hmm.
The Fiona the alligator.
Really, yeah, I've never held an alligator before, but they're like soft and warm, but also scaly.
Well, I think she was probably warm from everybody holding her because like that's how they regulate their temperature. They regulate it outside of their bodies. But then there was also, Jason, did you see the Red Toad Tortoise?
No.
You didn't?
No, I wasn't looking for the turtles.
Okay. Well, I saw that. I don't know.
Hear the dogs
I definitely hear the dogs fighting in the background. They're full of P&V.
Okay,
really bad.
Well, I guess I'll have to cut that out. And the second story, oh my goodness, what are they doing?
Beaker is beakering.
She's being ridiculous. My second story is I built an. What is going on?
They're fighting so bad.
Okay. My second story is I built for our Mandalorian team some really cool costumes. I have the Beskar Mandalorian, which is the shiny one. Duncan, our oldest son, he went as the OG Mandalorian, so that before he got his shiny armor. I built Chris a Bo-Katan, which is a female Mandalorian. And then I built for Adam the IG-11 droid. If you've seen the TV show, IG-11 is one of the coolest characters. And I'll tell you, once Adam put on that IG-11 costume, because it's really tall, he's probably, the tip of the helmet's probably 7.5 feet tall at least. We got probably hundreds and hundreds of pictures. We wanted to walk all the way down to a hall and then walk around. We only made it 3/4 of the way down, and then we had to come back. That was 2 hours of walking and taking pictures for people. And it was really fun. And Adam was a trooper because that costume is not super comfortable. But he was in it. I think you were in it for like 2.5 hours, Adam. And I swear we got hundreds and hundreds of pictures taken. And the IG-11 was the draw. People really liked that robot. So that's
it makes it a lot easier to stay in the costume for a long time when there's people taking pictures of you and people smiling and people being like, "Oh my God, that's IG-11! No way!"
They would lose their mind when they saw IG-11.
But yeah, that's how I stayed in that costume for so long, even though my shoulders were sort of killing me at the end of it because you can't move your arms. But yeah,
it's not a very comfortable costume. It's tough because I had to build it based on a robot that has no human proportions.
All right. Well, that's story time for this podcast episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next episode of the podcast. So bye-bye.
That's it for this week's Science Podcast episode. Thank you so much for coming back week after week to listen to us. Special thanks to Janique-ka John, who talked to us about all things computer engineering, and we got into a really deep discussion about where she's from in the Caribbean. I'd also like to give a shout out to our patrons on Patreon. Our Patreon page keeps growing, and I think people are really enjoying the private Twitter account. A perk of being a top tier patron is you get to hear your name at the end of the podcast. Take it away, Chris.
Anne Schlarm, Sharon Dotson, Peggy McKeel, Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Ryder, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coos, Marianne McNally, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Julie Smith, Andrew Lynn, Elizabeth Parmenter, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Halberg, Jenny Giger, Leela Perriello, Lisa Swartz, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.